welcome. Welcome to this presentation. I'm Martin Russ. I'm the Vice Chair of the ISTN. The ISTN is the Ipswich and Suffolk Technical Network. And Sam Parnell normally introduces this and has a much more fluid presentation. And so, yes, she normally talks about how the ISTN is a bringing together of lots of groups around Ipswich that have broad coverage of coding, tech stuff, entrepreneurism, I said coding. I did a talk on music, for instance. So yes, lots of stuff, lots of technical knowledge, etc., etc. Yes, entrepreneurism, I threw that in, and lo and behold, tonight's talk is on exactly that topic. So if I could welcome Steve Barnes, who's our speaker tonight. The thing I need to ask is, Steve, do you want questions whilst you're talking, or do you want us to wait politely until the end and then bombard you with difficult questions?
Whilst I'm talking would be great with that.
In the video, of course, all this will be edited out and it will look wonderful.
Yes, as I was saying, I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Suffolk Business School, and I've been there since what I call the Big Bang in 2007, because it was when the university was created. Before then, it was a higher education institution. And I've lectured, researched, and written the business school in entrepreneurship, innovation, creativity, consultancy management, project management, all those sorts of things at master's level. But nevertheless, my principal interest is entrepreneurship here at the university. And I'm sure you'll see that as this session unfolds. I've worked as a senior manager in business for most of my life, actually more of my life than I have been teaching. So I've worked for IBM in EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa, on proactive thought management. I've worked for BT, systems design and technical sales. I've worked for Caspian Software, Balanced Scorecard, and you might have heard of Gartner, TCO qualification, Suffolk County Council, many more. I won't spend too much time boring you. There's nothing worse than people going on about what they've done in their life. But it's important. One of the things important for me to say is I was a founder member of several startup business incubators, and also of several businesses, including my own, which I sold last year. One of them you may or may not have heard of, depending on your age. I'm sure John will have heard of BT Brightstar over at Adastral Park. I was there for a couple of years, and we had some reasonable success there.
Yeah, I spun a company out through Brightstar.
Did you? What was it called?
Real-time content.
Oh, I remember it. Yes, I remember it. Do you remember Rocking Frog? And
yeah.
Do you remember Azure?
Azure, yeah.
It was bought up by Subex. And
yep.
Anyway, sorry, we reminisce. We digress.
Yes, we mustn't reminisce, yes.
But today, what we'll be covering today is you as a leader. What does leadership mean? Then after that, the emergent model of entrepreneurial leadership, sometimes called the accidental model, and the way in which entrepreneurial leaders often emerge rather than are appointed. Well, then we talk about strength-based leadership, which is a fairly contemporary model that I'm really in favour of. It's quite an exciting new way of looking at things. Entrepreneurial leadership as company culture, and how two particular companies, 3M and Google, how they manage leadership as a culture in their company, and also as style, entrepreneurial leadership as style. So I can't, obviously we can't spend too much time, but I was trying to think of what crucial questions could I ask you that might give me a feel for who my audience is, so that I'm addressing the right subjects. So I thought I might ask something like, how many of you run your own business currently? Could we have a show of hands? How many of you are interested in starting their own business? Is that a kind of a no? I don't think you are. So okay, so I've got a feel just in those couple of questions of where it is you're sort of headed, or what your interests might be.
Steve?
Yeah,
I'm actually running a startup I started the new business alongside my existing business about a couple of years ago. So.
Oh, fantastic. Can we know what it's called, or is it too young to say?
It's called Giant.
Oh, right.
Giant Life Skills. It's I help people with resilience, and people, companies, communities with resilience.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's great. I'm always a fan of startups. It's always been the key, the sort of centre of what I look at, really. Well, like to start getting in straight into, if you like, what is an entrepreneurial leader? And you can probably see this book called Entrepreneurship with Stokes, Wilson and Mador, which I wrote a case study for. And that case study was on a particular character called Julian Harris. Does anybody know that name at all? It'd be good if you don't, but
not familiar to me yet.
No, you might come to. He started up a company called Salmon, the CEO of Salmon. Are you seeing these texts? I always feel a bit like I'm blind here. I don't know what you can see.
Yes, we can see them.
Julian Harrison, CEO of Salmon. You can see that, yeah?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So this is kind of just a snapshot of what this case study is about. Julian Harris started a company called Salmon, and he was using a code-switching structured program language called Packbase, and it's developed and maintained by IBM. So you can straight away see this is a heavyweight bit of software writing and programming here that he was involved in. But nevertheless, he carried on with almost like the archetypal in a garage somewhere, 2 or 3 friends that also had these sorts of skills. Have you got a Dave F waiting to enter the room?
Oh, yes, I have.
And then, so this sort of software is used for complex enterprise solutions like council tax. So you can imagine if you get 1 or 2 customers that use this, it can be very powerful and very lucrative. And he used to pick up on blue chip customers to start with. And then suddenly along came a recession for 3 years. And he got himself into all sorts of trouble. Customers stopped spending. Essentially, that's what it was all about. The company really did struggle because it was having to fund these engineers and its premises and everything else. But then at the end of 3 years, they managed to survive after taking on a lot of debt, and then work started to pick up. And picked up really well, and just by happenstance, it was doubling every year, and the company was starting to do very, very well. And at one time, it was the 32nd fastest growing company in the UK with revenues of 22 million. So it started to get some traction. It was a really serious company. And then guess what? Another recession. And Julian was faced with this really difficult task. I actually sat alongside him and took notes about the whole of this journey before I wrote it up. And he said this was one of the most difficult times because he had this dilemma. Did he sell the company to get rid of all these liabilities that he had, or did he sack half of his directors? The very clever thing that he did is he kept a controlling interest. He kept more than 50% of the shares of the company himself. Then the sector collapsed, so he had no choice. The decision was taken away from him, and he had to sack 5 staff. And I don't know how he did it, but this is an indication that entrepreneurs often experience a stressful period, and a £1 million overdraft, which I'm reliably told was actually on credit cards, I think must have kept him awake at night. But this is what he felt he ought to do. And
that's
then
an impressive credit card set that you've got.
Yes, he must have done.
Mine would let me borrow nowhere near that.
And then it was released or relaunched as a company called Smart 421, which he said stood for smart for the 21st century. And they were based in Phelan Maltings in Ipswich. I don't know whether you recall them. Yeah. You pick it up, Mark, are you, Martin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember them.
So Smart 41, and then he'd spent a lot of time thinking about how do I get an exit strategy? How do I restructure this whole company to make myself look really attractive? And he spent a lot of time working on getting the right setting up the right customers. He was essentially, in front of investors, he was essentially a beauty parade. He was trying to show to all the potential investors why it was worth their while investing in him, because it was part of the exit strategy. And then finally, the day came, it was spread over no more than a week, and they sold to Kingston Communications for 24.24 million, which is a kind of success, whatever you put it. Now, at the end of today's session, what I plan to do is to show you where he is now. But I thought I'd leave that one hanging because I still know Julian. But this was, if you like, what this says to me is that there are a couple of key points here. And by the way, blue chip company, I think you're all familiar with what that means, aren't you? It's the companies that are reputable, financially stable, and long established within the sector. Those were his blue chip targets. And what do we learn from this? I think what we learned from this is that entrepreneurs meet shocks. We can see that he had several shocks. We can see he had to think on his feet to survive, to prosper, make difficult decisions under pressure. And that is the job of the entrepreneurial leader. And I think anybody who starts their own business is an entrepreneurial leader. Is that you, Martin, with your hand up?
No.
All right.
It may be. I may still have it left up. Yes, I've still got it left up from previously.
Yeah, no problem.
I did it electronically rather than physically.
Right. So I've heard this whole notion of rushing into uncertainty, this notion of entrepreneurial leadership. And there are several forms which we'll touch on today, is emergent leadership and how it happens, strength-based leadership and what leaders should concentrate on. And I think I'll leave you with Julian's statement here. I haven't got it on a screen, but he says, don't underestimate the strain on the underlying business and mentally prepare staff for the ups and downs that will inevitably occur. And don't underestimate the petty stuff, photocopier maintenance, building lease, etc. It's an emotional time for all the company, but with the right attitude, it can be fun. Get good advisors and make your own decisions. And that's where we leave Julian. I don't know whether you've got anything to say about that, but I'll click on to the next slide if you're okay with where we are.
In my experience, it looks like the standard path of difficulty followed by amazing progress, followed by difficulty, followed by etc. So yes, a career, as they say, where you career from one thing to the next.
Yes, and many do fall by the wayside in those red text that I've shown on the screen. They don't recover from that. They decide to fold. Now, so where I want to start is manager or leader. What's the difference? Anybody got any thoughts? I mean, I've got some thoughts, and not just thoughts, but references at the bottom there. You can see Burson and Stieglitz talk about leadership conversations and what it means to be a high potential manager or what it means to be a leader. Does anybody have any thoughts about the difference between a manager and a leader? Is it kind of obvious what the difference is or not?
I think leaders have followers, and managers don't necessarily manage to attract that kind of loyalty.
Yeah. Well, some of the theory says that the management characteristics is all about administration, setting specific goals, providing a structure for the team, and producing plans. And that's the kind of minimum you've got to do. And that same sort of group of theory that it talks about leadership characteristics being about innovation and motivating your group of staff and inspiring them and empowering them. And when that's, you can kind of look around. In fact, we do later on look at this formally, but you can kind of look around the environment you're in. And if you're part of a larger organization, it's worth thinking about, do you have a leader ahead of you or do you have a manager? And if you don't have a leader, then how likely is it that some entrepreneurial growth is going to take place? And if it's just you, then do you have these sorts of characteristics? Innovation, motivation, inspiration, and empowerment. Can you do that? Bless you, Emma. So I'd like to start with and try and share this video. Let's see what happens.
A topic of special concern in today's fast-changing world of leadership is what traits encourage entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship refers to initiating a venture, organizing the necessary resources, and assuming the associated risks and rewards. An entrepreneur recognizes a viable idea for a business, product, or service and carries it out by finding and assembling the necessary resources, money, people, machinery, location, to undertake the business venture. Entrepreneurial leaders display many of the same characteristics as other leaders, but some traits are particularly important for entrepreneurs. 4 characteristics considered highly important to entrepreneurial leaders are the following. First, vision and dissatisfaction with the present. To start something new requires that the entrepreneur be dissatisfied with the way things are now and have a clear vision for how things should be. Entrepreneurs are more concerned with innovation, creativity, and creating new processes than with maintaining the status quo. Next, the ability to get people on board. Entrepreneurial leaders have to continually recruit others to join in, support, and add to the vision. Third, flexibility, openness to feedback, and the ability to learn and adapt. No one has all the answers, and entrepreneurial leaders must be willing to listen, learn, and adapt. Finally, persistence and execution. Entrepreneurial leaders are tenacious in the pursuit of the vision and take active steps in the here and now to bring the future to life. If one thing doesn't work out, they try another. They are typically highly self-motivated and are willing to stretch themselves and take risks to achieve the vision. For some leaders, these entrepreneurial traits come naturally, but many people can develop these characteristics. Entrepreneurial leadership is a source of innovation and change.
Does that ring any bells? So I begin the journey. I mean, hopefully you one of the things in there that was interesting was about how entrepreneurial leaders do try to understand what it is they don't do well and they draft in other people. We'll come back to that subject in a little while under the notion of strength-based leadership. But if we just look at the history of entrepreneurship, it started with John Baptiste Say. He believed that achieving a higher yield was the true goal, and with higher productivity was the answer. It was the way to go forward. In fact, it was called Say's Law in the time, 1767 to 1832. So this notion has been around for a long time. But then when it was updated, it was by a guy you're bound to have heard of called Joseph Schumpeter. And he was the first one to bring in this notion of creative destruction. Creative destruction is a process through which something new brings about the demise of whatever existed before. So it destroys that market. And this is used in a variety of areas, including economics, corporate governance, technology, and marketing, where it takes over. And it's used to describe the process where a new product necessarily destroys an existing market and may even produce what's called monopoly incomes. In other words, you get all the income and the other guys get nothing. And I thought about in the past, if you think about cars pushed out the railways because they took over, people wanted to buy cars rather than to travel by train. And that was partly what the beaching cuts were funded by that, because people just weren't using them. Then in the 2000s, video streaming killed DVD rental. If you remember DVD rental, the Blockbusters and the like, these shops where you could hire a DVD and some popcorn for the evening. That I don't know why Blockbuster didn't think, but because they didn't take account of streaming, then they went under. And today we see lithium batteries are pushing out the combustion engine because it's new technology. It's competing with traditional forms of energy supply. So it's always been, ever since I've taught entrepreneurship, it's always been the challenge is what actually is it? And we can see on here, it says entrepreneurship is the creation or extraction of value Bloody blah, blah, generally entailing risk beyond what is normally encountered. And for me, that's the key. It's the risk. I do get quite irritated when I see episodes of The Apprentice with Alan Sugar calling these guys who he gives them some cheese and goes to sell it in a market to make a profit and calls them entrepreneurial. I mean, where is the risk? At worst, they'll lose a few pounds, but there's no real risk involved. And
it would have to be a new type of cheese, wouldn't it, or something not like cheese, but that you sell in the same way, or something. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's something I often used to challenge my students with. Think of a new way of delivering it. May be the same product, but a new way of delivering that service. Like the DVD, a new way of delivering films is streaming. But for me, what for me encapsulates it is not only that it's high risk, but also it creates some proper value. But selling cheese, buying at one price and selling another, doesn't really contribute to any value in society. And if you go to the ultimate ends of what entrepreneurship is, I've encapsulated in this picture, growing flowers in the desert. It's high risk, it's really difficult. And if you could, for example, create or get some value out of these flowers, you've created something which is really difficult and high risk and is entrepreneurial. I think it's often misused, the notion of entrepreneurship. I think often what they mean is just enterprising. It's enterprising to do this, that, or the other. And I think what they do on Alan Sugar is the middleman anyway. It's not actually true value creation. I just wanted to say a subset of entrepreneurship was something you may or may not have heard of called entrepreneurship, where a person is trying to create value inside of a company instead of stepping out and starting their own business. They stay within an organization. Leo Iacocca was one of them in America that tried to do lots of innovation inside a company. So there is also the notion of entrepreneurship. And then we get to the emergent model of entrepreneurship. I'm going to put a light on here because it's getting quite dark around here. Doesn't look like in my studio flat behind me, but it's actually quite dark in my little study. So the notion of what is the emergent model. The emergent model is sometimes called the accidental entrepreneur because they happen upon an idea through their own use and then click to share it with others. They also, after having shared it with others, they often become the product itself. Ford and Dyson and whoever, they become the product. And classically, when they find they can't do something, they'll draft in people to help, which is not uncommon. And the core team usually are passionate about the product and not necessarily about learning new skills. It's one of the things we learned in the Bright Star Incubator. To start with, when we had lots of these world-class technologists that we wanted to form into startup companies, we thought a good idea would be to teach them about marketing, get them to find out how to do marketing programs. We fairly quickly found out that world-class entrepreneurs don't want to know about marketing. That's why they're world-class entrepreneurs. They focus on their strengths and what they do. And so we ended up drafting in or interim managers, people who did know all about marketing and the various aspects of business. We had to draft them in to support this core group of highly technical engineers. And of course, the accidental entrepreneur uses their network to spread the word. And what you may also know about entrepreneurs and startups, early startups, is that they don't have the money. And so the whole notion of traditional companies having a multi-million-pound marketing budget is anathema to a startup because they just don't have it. And a modern way of doing this is crowdfunding. So I wanted to show you a crowdfunding video, which was kind of awarded 2018 best video to show you what a crowdfunding video could and should, and we'll just have a few words about it afterwards. What it delivers to the Emergent. I mean, this guy, when he started, he was just carving up boards for himself, for him and his mates, and eventually found that there was some traction to the market and put out several crowdfunding videos, of which this is the best. And that's how he got enough money to invest in his company. So I'll just share another screen with you. This is the 2018 prize-winning crowdfunding video.
We believe exploration makes us better people. A sense of fascination and discovery you learn as a child. A feeling of flight across water as far as you can see. That's why we invent. Showing design experiences. To travel, to explore. That's what makes us tick. We have designed and developed a new way to travel on water. This is a new category of personal watercraft that can be launched anywhere. While studying product design at Loughborough University, as part of the Life-Saving Club, I became fascinated with rescue equipment. I also found there'd been little innovation in that field. And I realized that lots of lifeguards and rescuers keep their boats and jet skis off the beach, and they take a long time to launch. I saw an opportunity for a quick launch, one-person watercraft, something that could be used in difficult to reach areas such as rivers and canals. Whilst developing the rescue product, we found that this was loads of fun to be blasted through the water. So we created Wave Jam, our leisure product. Wave Jam is all about removing the faff of owning a personal watercraft. I designed the first watercraft prototype whilst working as a design engineer at Vax, where I worked on noise reduction in vacuum cleaners. Short on space, I set up a tent in my garden. This is where I spent 3 months developing the first watercraft. We've come a long way since then. We raised our first round of investment, we designed a product to production level, and we set up a production partner. We have a patent pending and EU design registration granted. Everything is tooled up and ready for production, and we're now producing and shipping rescue and wave jam watercrafts worldwide. The product has been thoroughly tested, and in fact, we're selling them quicker than we can produce them at the moment. Along the way, we've won lots of awards. But most importantly, we've got an incredible team behind the product. We've had tons of other amazing support from people too. Now at production level, we need your investment to grow faster. Your investment will allow us to improve production capabilities, to invest in sales and marketing, and to grow our team. With your investment, this will allow us to get more people out of the water. Don't just take my word for it though. We build electrical products, including obviously the watercraft, but we also build electric motors, electric bob bikes.
Right, I think that's sufficient for that to get the message across. One of the things he said in there, if you recall, was he spent 3 months developing the first product from a tent. And so this is a fairly new startup, and hence using crowdfunding to help with it. He used the tag Loughborough University and others to lend credibility to the venture. Did you notice that as he was talking? He used the word innovation, versatility, team, and personal. They're all key words in his pitch that meant that it was more believable and trustworthy. He had a patent, intellectual property, that was always key in Brightstar. You had something that you could barter with venture capitalists for, because you had intellectual property that was commercially defensible. And he shows that, he shows all of this clearly as a kind of pitch, really, to investors into his business. You can see what this is aimed at, this whole video. And he talks this whole Schumpeterian language of new technology and disrupting old ways of doing things. So starting with no money is another reason why the risk is higher. Do you remember I said that to be an entrepreneurial leader, strictly speaking, it's if it involves a high risk, that defines the entrepreneurial leadership, and that in this case is an emergent entrepreneur. So what I thought I'd then talk about was, okay, how does this, is there a kind of trajectory to how startups and how leadership nurtures entrepreneurship and new businesses? And what I've been finding through my research is that it begins usually with inspiration. And some people think that that inspiration then moves to action. But actually, often it doesn't. It means that you've got this new sense of vision. And so you might be going backwards instead of just inspiration and then action, which is the way that many people think that products and services develop. And so it's contrary to this dominant assumption that vision always leads to action. It often doesn't. It's an iterative, circular kind of process that's often characterized as inadvertent or developmental. And I think it's important to understand it's a complex process that is not linear. It's rarely linear. And in particular, what I wanted to do was to share with you this. I don't know if you've ever considered social entrepreneurship or even if some of you are already engaged in social entrepreneurship, but it's a particular kind of entrepreneurship that really doesn't develop in a linear way, as this video will show you. Andy Stoll takes a walk through some of the developments that have occurred in his life that really bring this point home.
My father is a social worker, and my mother is a nurse. So since the day I was born, I was raised with the belief that I should do good things in the world. So I brought that belief here to the University of Iowa. And on this campus, in this very building, I learned skills and abilities, had experiences that led me to where I am today, 10 years after my graduation, where I work as a social entrepreneur. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, a social entrepreneur is a person who tries to solve social problems with entrepreneurial skills. Let me give you some examples. So the most famous or notable, or one of the most notable social entrepreneurs of our current era is Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus is an economics professor in Bangladesh, and he saw in the late 1970s a problem that he wanted to solve. And he saw the economy of the world rising, but he also saw that billions were being left behind, particularly in the rural areas of poor countries like Bangladesh. And he came up with an idea, which on its face is a really stupid sounding idea, which is let's loan money to poor people that don't have any collateral and probably will never pay you back. He worked on this idea for 30 years and developed the idea of micro lending. And that is if you could take $10, $20, $50, and you could give it to a poor person, primarily women. Sorry guys, I learned that women are better at this stuff. That not only would that woman invest that money in starting a business, that if you put her in a cohort with other women that kept accountability amongst them, that they in fact would pay that loan back about 96% of the time, which is actually better than probably commercial lending, even in the United States. What they also found, or what Mohammed found, was that if you gave a woman a little bit of money and she started a business, the money that she made, she would first invest in her children, in health and education, which would bring up those children, which would bring up the family and the village and the state and eventually the country and hopefully the world. It took him 30 years to figure this out, but in 2006, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize for the idea and his invention or the creation of the first microloan programs. That's one social entrepreneur.
Right, I want to leave that there because I think there's plenty of lessons to learn from that in its own right, in that this took this guy 30 years to figure out how to make money out of being a social entrepreneur. And it's not a linear process. Andy Stoll is the name of the guy who started this, who's presenting at the TEDxUIowa University. And although we don't have all the details, we can see that this particular entrepreneurial leader's trajectory is not a clear one developed on linear techniques. It's just a different style. For a long time, entrepreneurship has been seen as a process of filling a gap in the market. And part of what I'm talking about today is to say that that is absolutely not the case. That it's rare for business startups to look for gaps in the market. If we take, for example, the World Wide Web, nobody looked for a gap in the market when that first came out. But rather, a need was fulfilled because Tim Berners-Lee's idea was to ensure backup safety of data while he was working at CERN. He produced a telephone directory. That was his first project, to make sure that people in CERN, no matter where they were in the country or in the world, could get access to the telephone directory. And that vision slowly developed until we arrived where we are now with the World Wide Web. But it's often misunderstood. I mean, my go-to example is there's a gap in the market for beef ice cream. I mean, nobody makes it. So, you might think that that's an ideal place to aim for, but it's clear that there's a gap there for a reason. It may not always be as obvious as beef ice cream. But if you want to read more about it, the Journal of Business Venturing, the entrepreneurial journey as an emergent hierarchical artifact creating process. So if one evening you feel you can't sleep, I'd search this article out and have a good read, and before you know where you are, you'll be off. So I wanted to talk in more practical terms then of what the actual process was from my own experience in the several incubators that I've been part of. And the first thing is ideation, we often call it, where you're spotting the opportunity, you're coming up with ideas about all the things that you could create that might develop into something. And very quickly, either in the incubator or with my students at the university, I would urge them to produce a proof of concept pilot. In the case of BT Brightstar, there's actually an office or a factory just outside the wire of the research centre at Martlesham who do nothing but produce proof of concept pilots. So they can make you a balsa wood model, or they can make you anything you want to that shows what this thing will look like, its size, its texture, its colour. And often that's something which is very useful if you're trying to secure some funding and you need some purchase. So you can just show somebody what it looks like. Another important aspect I always felt was market testing. Now, that wasn't anything expensive or deep. Again, in the case of students, it was I'd send them outside the university with a clipboard, and the first 15 people that went by, I would ask them to stop them and say, if I was to produce this product at this cost, would you buy it? And if all 15 of them said no, then, okay, it's not a science, but there's a fairly good chance that this won't be the sort of thing that would get any purchase in the marketplace. In the case of the entrepreneurs at Brightstar, it was more about their networking contacts. And without giving away the secrets of how they did it, they could expose what they were doing to see whether, for example, there was a market for real-time content, and did people actually want that in their life? And then often as a result of that market testing, you might people often did a review of the product or service. In fact, it got quite irritating at Brightstar, because some startups would change it every month to a new product or service as they spotted a new opportunity that didn't have all the disadvantages of the old one, but did have these great new ideas that they'd come up with. And again, you go back through market testing and see if people liked the new product or service. And crucially, through many of these companies, it became important that you find your first customer, partly because it helps with cash flow, partly because it helps with credibility, and partly because it helps with valuation of the company. And maybe even if you're looking for investors, to know that you've got a customer for your product. And then, of course, finding investors. As we know, business angels or angel investors would probably invest up to $1 million, and above that, you'd be looking for venture capitalists. The key thing here is that business angels, for many of them, it's a lifestyle approach. They don't need to invest, they just choose to. Whereas venture capitalists, it's their job. They have to every day go out there, seek out opportunities, throw money at it, and see if they can make a profit. And we reached a kind of feeding frenzy at Brightstar, because there were so many venture capitalists looking to be able to invest in these strong companies with a strong intellectual property, with patents, with world-class technologies. There was lots of value in the company that investors could perceive. And then eat, sleep, repeat, until you find yourself with some kind of traction or purchase. So if there is a process, this isn't in a textbook anywhere. This is just many years of experience about if there was a process, this tended to be the way that most companies went. Whether that helps you or not is another story, but that was the process. Now, I wanted to just quickly switch. It seems quite abrupt, but I wanted to get straight onto this quite quickly, because this is one of these new contemporary ideas, which I think has got a lot of traction. It's got it's a strength, a pre-existing capacity. This is a strength for a particular way of behaving, thinking, or feeling that is authentic and energizing to the user and enables optimal functioning, development, performance. Now, in the past, I don't know whether any of you have been in corporate life, but often come appraisement time, your boss will sit down with you and say, do you know, you've got a couple of weaknesses here. There's certain things you can't do, and we want to send you away on training courses to strengthen those weaknesses. Well, this contemporary approach to life says, forget it. Forget weaknesses, concentrate on the strengths and make the strengths even stronger. And if you need whatever it is that this person hasn't got, draft in someone who has got those strengths. And it turns the whole thing on its head about looking for being very well aware of what it is that you possess. It's almost something might call it a talent. It's something you possess as a strength. And all of you will have things that you do naturally without even thinking about. And it's those things which this theory says we should be concentrating on, frankly. Not all those silly things that we might think them silly. And like your world-class technologists that didn't want to know about marketing. Why would they? It's not their forte. It's not their strength. It's not what they do. And we found that out in real life. And along comes strength-based leadership. One of the ways that you can test this is Clifton's Strengths Finder. Now, just out of curiosity, about 3 weeks ago, I tracked this down and I took a test to find out what my particular strengths are. It's about 20 quid. You can find it on Google, you can track it down, and they send you your score. And it's slightly insightful, but you can never get away from the fact with any survey or any questionnaire you fill in, it's self-reporting. You are telling it what you think. It can't find it in any other way than what you tell it. So you won't be surprised to find language coming back at you that you put in the original questionnaire. But that's not to take anything away from this. It does give you some insights. So does Peterson Seligman's values in action. That's another way of measuring strength-based leadership. Then there's Realize 2. Another way of looking at values. You can see there's quite a lot of people piling into this space. Maybe they're being entrepreneurial, maybe they're being sort of new ideas and where can we make money. And because strengths-based leadership is a relatively new thing, then this is why so many of these people are. The reflected best self is another one of those tools that you can pick up and run with. What is it that you're naturally good at? But of course, don't forget, you're telling it what you're good at in a way. It's just asking you in different words. And the 4 domains of Strength Finder are, I've deleted this slide because I didn't want to spend too much time on it because you don't get a lot from it. It's if you want to go ahead and do this, there are 4 domains. There's executing. Are you an achiever, an arranger, and a believer? Yeah, that's one domain of Clifton's Strength Finder. The second one is influencing. Are you an activator and a completer? The third one is relationship building. Are you a developer of relationships? And the last one is strategic thinking. Are you analytical, contextual, futuristic, those kinds of things? So you wouldn't find it very difficult to get to the source data from just Googling that Clifton Strength Finder. And in fact, in a session I do at the university, we do go through this and they do get the answers online at the time, and then we can discuss what the outcome was. But we don't have enough time in an hour. So moving quickly on, I wanted to go to the notion of entrepreneurial leadership as company culture. And a couple of the companies that do this, Google call it 20% time. And what they do is they trust their employees to spend 15 to 20% of their time to do whatever they want that will most benefit the company. And there's the challenge. What will benefit the company? I mean, my argument is learning another language would benefit the company if you had an international market that you were dealing with. It could be any number of things that you feel personally you'd like to develop a bit more. One of your strengths that you'd like to get stronger at, you know, and Google kind of instills this culture into its business by asking bosses to allow their employees this time to spend doing it. 3M call it 15% time, and you can guess why. It's the same kind of idea, but slightly less time given to employees to do whatever it is that they want. And the more cynical of them is Yahoo, call it 120% time, because you not only do your day job, but you do 20% on top. That's their argument, and you might argue that that's mismanagement, but that's just what Yahoo do. But I'd argue and urge you to think about whether you're an employee or you're a leader, that this ought to feature in your management, if you like. Your leadership style is that people ought to be given time to spend on doing things that they value, but also, by the way, you know, helps the company. Ask employees what they want to learn. Find out what's more important to them. Starting a blog was an example I thought of, or learning how to use Adobe Photoshop, both of which would help anybody if they were in that creative part of the business, what they were had to use these sorts of things, or learning a language, or those sorts of things are likely to put you in the space of creating a culture of entrepreneurship inside an organization. I did think briefly about, there is again, you can Google the ENTRELEAD scale items that talk about how entrepreneurial is your leader. And this is something which, again, is quite often important to groups that I spend some time with, or even students, where they need to try and assess how entrepreneurial the environment around them is. And if you just Google ENTRELEAD, you can find out what the scale items are, how they're weighted, how to score them, and you can come up with them if that's something you want to do. You can choose to do that or not, but I'll leave that. The key word there is ENTRELEAD if you want to find out more about the subject. So what have we been doing today? What we've been doing is we've spoken about the case of Julian Harris and his startup business, Smart 41. analyze how the company evolved and finally sold out to Kingston Communications, or KCOM, as you may see it. I still spot it on the shares index that I thumb through occasionally. We looked at the difference between a manager and a leader and components of entrepreneurial leadership, namely to motivate, to innovate, to inspire, and to empower. We touched on the beginnings of entrepreneurship in the 18th and 19th century and the emergence of this notion of creative destruction as destroying something that's already there, with features of, in the particular case of Schumpeter, of innovation, of competition, and particularly free trade. It was quite keen that the government didn't intervene and interfere with that whole process. Then we move to the emergent or accidental entrepreneurial leader. Often starts with little or no money, drafting others to help, use crowdfunding as a means of finance, and use their networks to grow and influence, is the way that evolution tends to take place. We discussed the sort of trajectory. We discussed this notion of whether it's vision and action or whether it's actually much more complex than that. And we looked for this 8-stage process of entrepreneurship, from ideation through market testing to actually going out and finding a first customer and some funding. And then we looked at strengths-based leadership, this fairly contemporary notion that we should be concentrating on strengths, not weaknesses. We looked at company culture as the Google 15%, or 3M's 15 and 3M's 15 and Google's 20% time, and how that works in practice. Again, you might like to think about the practical limitations and how do you make that happen, and how do you monitor it, and how do you make sure that that person is spending just that 20% of time, or do they, in some cases, have to work in addition? And then we asked about the evolution of entrepreneurial leadership and how entrepreneurial, if you wanted to go down that ENTRELEAD route and find out how entrepreneurial your environment is. And that's kind of what we've been doing in the last hour. I wanted to I said I'd share with you where Julian is today. He works for a company called GrowWorks, a co-founder and chairman in South Africa. I still keep in touch with him on LinkedIn to see what he's doing, what he's up to. But if you just read the text there, you'll notice that many of the things that he's doing is quite similar to what they were doing in Smart 421, but doing it in South Africa. Clearly a new market. Specialized software solutions to public and private sector. That's classic Smart 421. Solving real world business problems. And bespoke software solutions. So, you know, and he's doing very well. I mean, he obviously took a big lump of money with him when he went there from the sale to Kingston, but it allowed him to start up this new business and a new empire, if you like. And I thought I'd leave you with just a vision of the future, the world of tomorrow. Assume risk, no venture. Step outside your comfort zone, expect the unexpected, and failure is an option. And that's where I'd like to leave today's session. So thank you for your forbearance. If you've got anything you want to say, please do go ahead and chip in.
Okay, so thank you, Steve. Does anyone have any questions?
It was far too clear, obviously. Far too clear. What about you, Rob? Does this ring any bells with you? If you've got a startup, does any of this sort of chime with the sorts of things that you're experiencing?
Yes, I think so. I think the point you were making about the trajectory is not a linear process, has been my experience. Oh, yeah.
Quite certainly. So, yeah, there's the initial enthusiasm and inspiration that sparks a
a huge volley of momentum, and then you take the leap, and then you try to build the plane as you're falling, and you suddenly realize that you don't have all the parts that you need, and you're plummeted to the earth at a good rate, and so you have to go back and re-engineer your vision. And yes, it's a iterative process.
And that's where the resilience comes in, though, isn't it, Rob? That's where an entrepreneurial leader needs to have resilience. You can't just give up at the first hurdle. You just have to keep going. And that's again, comes through in the traits of entrepreneurial leaders.
And then you have to measure the risks. There's a bias called the sunk fallacy.
Yes.
You have to weigh up, am I over-invested here to the point where I'm losing my objectivity and my perspective? And that's where accountability comes in, and making sure that you're not doing the journey alone, and getting the help that you need when you need it.
Yeah, but as John will know coming from an accounting background, as you say, that's sunk costs, and you can't really make future investment decisions based upon what you spend. It's about whether you feel still you've got the faith that this will result in something that will provide value in the future. I remember in the past, in previous lives in business, we were sat around a board meeting where somebody said, we can't give this project up. We spent 25 million. To which somebody else very sensibly said, but that's ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't matter how much we spend. If we carry on spending, it will die and we will lose all of it. But it's that notion. The thing with entrepreneurial leadership is you don't know what the future is, do you? So you don't know whether it's going to be lost. That's the tricky part, I think. And that's where the risk comes in. It's how good's the business plan, the vision, the networking, all the things that you need to make it happen. That's why I enjoy this whole area, because there are no straight answers, really.
Oh, we've got Emma would like to ask a question, I think. Hands up.
Hi.
Yeah, there we go.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, no, I thought that was really interesting. Thank you. I think for me, one of the things that just thinking about my own situation and the company that I'm running, and we're going through this period of growth. But the thing I was particularly interested in was the strengths-based leadership piece. And as the team goes from a small team of everyone's got their area of expertise, but it's quite generalist, to bringing in more specialists as we grow, because you're able to, or one, the business is expanding, but you're able to add people with those strengths that you may not have in that area to really boost the team. So I thought that was really good, and something I want to look into more. I don't know if you've got any kind of suggested reading on it or anything, but
well, we did struggle with that same thing, Emma. We struggled with, should we try and get the people in the team to learn about it, or would we be better off just bringing somebody in who has that as a talent anyway? Yeah. And it was after 6 months of trying, it was a no-brainer. Bring in that extra talent, because it would take so long to divert all that energy and interest to people who are already there to learn something new. It's not to say we shouldn't all be learning something new. We're not going to be, necessarily the best at it if it's something we've only just started to learn.
Yeah.
You can't suddenly start learning sort of coding of data, inside a year and be excellent at it. You're probably doing it under duress because it's not something you've thought about before or decided that it was for you, so.
But yeah, then I think you could look at the kind of the general strengths you have as well. And if you're, I don't know, someone that's analytical or something, then learning new skills to apply that, great. But actually then don't go into a field within that company that's something quite different.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, you may be aware already of all your own strengths, Emma, but I think that Clifton Strengths Finder is a really good, way of getting you to sit down and think about what it is you feel, because while you're answering the questions, you've got to delve down inside and think, well, is something that I agree with or not? And that sort of challenging yourself does bring out something sometimes, like the Johari window, things that you didn't know.
Absolutely. Oh, great, thanks.
Thank you, Emma.
There's also the issue of the impact on the business. If you're if somebody's pretty bad at putting together spreadsheets, if you send them through lots of training, they'll move from pretty bad to mediocre. But
absolutely.
If you give that same level of training to somebody who's pretty good at it, then that small percentage of increase will have a much bigger impact on the business.
Yeah. Even recently, I've noticed that, Rob. There was a girl I've been working with doing some research together, and she just comes up with stuff. I don't know where she gets it from. And she's excited about it and says how interesting it is. And I am slightly less than enthusiastic about how interesting it is. But, she didn't get any training for that. She just loves it. She wants to go away and do much more research. That's her, what drives her, what gets her up in the morning. And why not? We don't all want to be doing the same things, but... Costin, have you got anything to say? I've not spoken to you yet.
Hi. Sorry, I joined in a bit late, so I don't know if you did introductions or anything like that.
Yeah, I just did some boring stuff about me that you probably don't want me to repeat. So
no, that's fine. I think one question that I have about this, something you didn't mention in the presentation, but I would ask, how important do you think having a formalized business plan is?
Excellent question, Costin. I'm so glad you brought that up. Excellent question. I've struggled with that for years and years. Well, more years than I care to mention, because in the early days, it was the only thing that investors ever looked at was the business plan. And you quickly realize that a business plan can be trashed within weeks when you suddenly find out through your market testing that there is no market there. And so you've got to regroup with it. We've started using something at the university called SIMventure, and it produces a business canvas, which is different from a business plan. And the canvas simply looks at various aspects. And the key part of the canvas is the marketing. And it's my passion that marketing should be at the fore of everything you do, because, you could invent an anti-gravity machine, but you do it on an island and no one ever hears about it. And unless you can get some traction, somebody out there interested in what you're doing, then it's, no matter how good it is, it doesn't matter. It can be the best thing ever. But without that exposure and that marketing, it can't, it can never get any sort of traction in the marketplace. So, I'm not sure that a business plan is the right way. And also, people sometimes stand behind a business plan. They hand you this big, thick wedge of documents that you really haven't got time to read or understand. And they may even use it for their own sort of security. They've done a lot of work. But invariably, the only thing that an investor might look at is the first sheet, the executive summary. I was going to say something which I probably can't repeat on Zoom, but it was again an investor in New York who we were proposing something to, and he kept saying, "Show me the effing money." He wasn't really interested in what the product was or how we served it, how we took it to market. He just wanted to know where was the formula that said how he was going to get money out of this. And I think business plan can, I'm not saying it's not got a place. I mean, you need to plan what you're going to do, and it's handy to have elements to it, like the marketing plan and the financial plan. But that can switch so quickly when you realize that that's not the right market. And it's sometimes better to have a business canvas that you can change in software, and it can give you a more up-to-date and a more easily. It's called Evolution, SIMventure Evolution. We've got a license for it at the university. There's two of them. I can't remember what the other one is. But we use that as a way of getting students to think really hard about what it is that they're trying to do here. Because we have found in the past, students just spend several months writing a business plan and that's it, done. And yet it doesn't mean anything, really. So I hope that's answered your question, but maybe it hasn't, Costin. I don't know.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, just wanted to mention, I used, I'm not currently an entrepreneur, but when I did an entrepreneurship course in university, we used something called the business model canvas developed by Strategizer, I think it was.
Yeah.
Is the one that you mentioned similar, or?
So, yes, same kind of thing. It's the same thing where you've basically got like panes on a screen, and you fill in the individual panes, and those panes can change, and so the relationship between them changes. But you can start to make some predictions, and it filters through to your financial spreadsheet, so you can start to see what the effects of what you do are. And of course, that's key. But yes.
Great, thank you.
Interesting. So it's like a mood board that creatives use, where you gather together lots of pictures that show you the sort of thing that you're trying to convey, and etc. That's interesting. How, yes, from two completely different directions, you get the same sort of end result. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I was at one time, I was teaching all of the first years in the business school in entrepreneurship, and we used to have them create a kind of, I'm not sure what the right name for it is. It's like a storyboard.
Yeah.
And they could put that up on the wall, and people would come around and have a look at it. And like you say, it would include pictures, and would try to make it the journey and what was the interest in it, and it's a very good way of starting to try and understand what it is, because it's not just about money and ideas. It's a lot more than that, and it's about engaging people in what this idea might be. And every year I'm constantly surprised about some of the ideas that students come up with. There's one, because I won't say who it is, but there's a certain company that I found out they were producing electronic business cards. I don't know if you've ever heard of such things, but I happened to be in need of a business card at the time.
Right.
I said to them, well, could I get like a beta copy or something of this? And they said, well, yes, you could do. But the thing is, the way that the card works is it's more helpful if you've got a CRM system, because the idea is that when you hand out your business card to somebody and they hand theirs to you, it's captured on your CRM system. So you can start to build client relations and those sorts of things. And then when I thought about, okay, could I use it for me? I thought, well, why don't we get the university to use it instead of giving us cardboard business cards? You know, if I could get the procurement section to start buying some of these business cards for us lecturers to use, that might be useful to the university to capture it on their CRM system, and so on. And so you never really know where these ideas are going to go when somebody grabs hold of them. And again, for them, we would have been one of their first big customers, and we're still working on that. So let's see where that goes.
Yeah. Seize the day, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And
okay.
Tempus fugit, as they might say right now.
Yes. Indeed. So I'd like to thank Steve for a fascinating talk. I'd like to thank all of the people for listening and giving interesting feedback and questions and so on. So thank you very much to all of you, and I hope that it was useful and interesting. And thank you. So thank you to everyone.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Don't forget that ISTN does a couple of talks like this a week. If you go to the website, you can see videos of previous talks, lots of subjects, not just entrepreneurism, but everything from, well, I did a talk on music, which I've probably already said, but yeah, there's lots and lots of topics. So thank you, and until next time.
Indeed.
Bye.
Yes. Thanks.
Right, all.
Thanks for hosting, Martin.
A pleasure.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.